Well, colleagues, good morning. One of the consequences of Zoom meeting is you can see how many participants are in the room. So I know I'm welcoming 139, no, 140 to this launch of the Birmingham Economic Review for 2020. For those who don't know me, I'm David Eastwood and I'm the Vice Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this launch. The Economic Review is produced through the long-standing partnership between City-REDI, which is hosted in the university here, and the GBS Chamber of Commerce. It's also a great pleasure to welcome the panellists and the speakers from who you'll be hearing soon. Mark Thurston, Councillor Bridget Jones, Lynn Miles, Deputy Director for Economic Recovery at BEIS, and they're going to be introduced more formally in a moment. I don't think there's been a time where the Economic Review has been more important to understanding the challenges of the present, and more important to the way in which we build for the future. At the heart of this year's review is how we need to manage the risks we face, how we safeguard health, how we protect jobs, but how we continue to develop our economy in a way which is resilient, which is sustainable, and which brings the kind of prosperity to the region from which so much flows. I'm sure from all our perspectives in our respective roles, we will find the review an important resource, an important stimulus. And one of the things that struck me actually over the last 8 months when we have been dealing with these unprecedented challenges is that I think as a city and as a city region, we have responded much more effectively than some other parts of the country. I think the partnership working that I've witnessed in the city and my university has been a part of has been crucial to the way in which we have responded. Organisations have come together, we have linked hands, we have innovated, we have been responsible, we have been agile, and we have been innovative. And I think that spirit of constructive innovation, that ability to work together, that ability to deal with the challenges of the present while looking to the future, is the kind of resource and resilience that will see us through this crisis, but to enable us to continue to build and to build still better for the future. I just look at my own university for a moment. In our medical school, since the outset, we have been pioneering new approaches to testing. We have developed and are taking to market through the binding site of Birmingham Company, the most sensitive antibody test that we currently have. We have also stood up in the university the first Pillar 2 lab as a part of the Lighthouse system of testing. Also, as we look to the future, as we announced last week, we now have a partnership with Bruntwood to develop the Birmingham Health Innovation Campus just to the south of the university and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So I think that's an example here at the university which is mirrored right across the city, right across businesses in the city, in the way in which we're trying to reconfigure our businesses for the present, but also playing our part in continuing to shape, to develop and to invest for the future. So the Economic Review that's been launched today sits foursquare in that dynamic between the present and the future. It's a key resource, and it is a resource I know which is both admired by and to some extent envied in other cities and other city regions. So I think on behalf of all of us, I want to thank Simon and his team at City-REDI. I want to thank the GBS Chamber of Commerce for the way in which we continue to work in lockstep. And now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Deborah Leary, OBE, who is going to introduce their panel and take the discussion forward. Deborah.
Thank you. It's lovely to welcome you. So thank you to Professor Sir David Eastwood for the warm welcome. And it's lovely to see the panellists on the call as well. And I will formally introduce the panellists when it comes to the actual panel session. This is the 5th annual Birmingham Economic Review produced by the University of Birmingham City-REDI and Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. And the review is an in-depth exploration of the economy of England's second city, and is a really high quality resource for organisations seeking to understand the city to inform research, policy or investment decisions. This year's report will provide a comprehensive analysis of the background economic factors that precipitated the impact of COVID-19 on Birmingham, the impact of the coronavirus and lockdown measures on the city's economy, and measures that business and stakeholders from across the city region can take to adapt and foster greater resilience and grow in this challenging environment. And I think the key word in that paragraph really is resilience. We've got to be extremely resilient as we're moving forward and continue to grow. The Birmingham Economic Review will assess the Birmingham Economic Review will assess the city's capabilities for innovation and adaptation and the potential of its resident workforce, the major transport and infrastructure projects on the horizon, how it can achieve inclusive and more ecologically sustainable growth in economic recovery, and opportunities to enhance the attractiveness of the city to visitors and to investors. The 2020 review will reflect on perhaps the biggest economic shock in recent history, that of COVID-19. However, it will also provide world-class, data-driven economic insights and experienced advice from some of the city's most prominent business leaders as to how the region and its businesses can begin to recover from these unprecedented events. The summary of Birmingham Economic Review, alongside the full publication, can be found at www.greaterbirminghamchambers.com, and a link to read it should have been sent to you already during the course of this event. For those of you on Twitter, please do tweet this morning using the hashtag BER20. And if everyone present could take 3 minutes to complete the post-event survey that will be emailed to you, that would be appreciated. Now, we were looking forward to introducing our honorary guest, Nadeem Sahawi, MP and Minister for Business and Industry. However, due to ministerial commitments, he's no longer able to be with us. So therefore, without further ado, I'd like us to move on to introduce Professor Simon Collinson, who is the Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor for Regional Engagement at the University of Birmingham, Director at the City Region Economic Development Institute, City-REDI, and WM REDI, to give us an overview of the whole report. Thank you, Professor Simon Collinson. I hand over to you.
Many thanks, Deborah. Can we put the slides up, please? I'm going to show some slides, and while those come up, I just wanted to thank also the Chamber of Commerce. They've been such excellent partners to work with again this year, and we've got a long-standing collaboration with them. They're super to work with, but also thanks to the panelists for agreeing to join us today, and finally thanks to all those who've contributed to this year's Birmingham Economic Review. There's a huge amount of partnership that goes into a document like this and the analysis that we do, and we're working with a lot of different groups across the city. So last year we had the Birmingham Economic Review at the Edgbaston Park Hotel. We were able to offer you breakfast. Sorry we can't share breakfast with you this year. We're going to definitely try and do that next year, and fingers crossed that'll be possible. But last year we focused on 3 specific features in the economic review. First of all, we were really celebrating back then the growth momentum. The city region was on a roll. I mean, it really was doing fantastically well. Productivity was really moving up. We had record levels of inward investment. So we were doing fantastically well. The second thing we focused on last year, though, was also persistent intra-regional and inter-regional inequalities, and we were looking at those as a knock-on effect to growth, and now we're looking at those as they worsen, and I'll come on to those a little bit later on. The third feature out of the three we talked about last time was the threat of a no-deal Brexit, and there's absolutely no change there. So we're going to talk a bit later about resilience in the face of Brexit and COVID. And interestingly, the initial work done by City-REDI colleagues on Brexit last year has really prepared us quite well for understanding better this unprecedented economic shock that's hit the region and the country this year. So can we go to the next slide, please? So it's no surprise that what we've done this year in the BER 2020 is that we've structured it in terms of before COVID, the impacts of the pandemic on a variety of different dimensions of our city region, health and well-being, population diversity, but also particularly for businesses, employment, investment, key sectors, and how this might be constraining innovation going forward. And there are a lot of sections on that, but we've also tried to capture beyond COVID, looking ahead to overcoming COVID and Brexit as key economic shocks, and trying to look at some of the opportunities. And I'm going to try to do the same thing today, because in a sense we've got to look up and we've got to look ahead. Otherwise it's a rather doom and gloom, I'm afraid. So that's the review. I'm going to pull some highlights out of this literally in the next five minutes or so. And I would, though, invite you to go online and read the summary, read the documents behind it, and read the analysis that goes into this, because it is just a summary with quite a lot of numbers in. I understand also today's World Statistics Day, which was news to me this morning. So can we go to the next slide, and I'll start picking out some of these highlights. Thanks very much. So lots of data. And in some ways we're slightly overwhelmed with information and data at the moment. What I want to do is to get you to recognize that the regional economy, like any regional economy, is a system, and it consists of these interconnected processes. And we capture snapshots, not just of those individual parts of the system, but also the processes that actually feature as a sort of knock-on effect, a contagion effect. There's a dynamic here. And what I'm going to just run through quite briefly is what I describe as the epidemiology of economic impact. Just like we need to track and trace, infections, epidemiology is the technical term for doing that. We also have to understand, in order to predict the future, what are the cascading effects and the circular impacts of this kind of economic shock to a region such as ours. And in the first stage, absolutely necessary lockdown because of the threat of mass infection, which would overwhelm the health system. You get a number of features there. Then you get a reduction in city centre footfall, you've got a reduction in traffic, events plummeting, visitor numbers down. Remember though, some of the numbers I'm featuring here compared to the summary, which is much more clear about this, some of these are for specific months. So in our city, 90% footfall, compared to 90% down on the year previously in April of this year. That went upwards, so by August of this year, it was only 48% down on August last year. So these are just individual data points pulled out of the overall summary. But in some ways, this does reveal the extent to which the economic shutdown. Lockdown has an effect on firm behaviour, and it has effect on consumers, and consumers drive firm demand. So this circularity is endemic in the system. So the knock-on effect, the impact to businesses, we've been discussing a huge amount, and this was absolutely significant. Huge fall in sales, obviously. Auto manufacturing, one of our sort of highlights as part of our advanced manufacturing sector, hit nationally, but there's particular impacts on our region because of that. Cash flow, liquidity, debt, insolvencies. In March, the NatWest UK regional PMI for the West Midlands fell to 36.1. That indicates a severe reduction in business output. And amongst UK regions back in March, only Northern Ireland and Scotland recorded a quicker fall in business since the previous month as the West Midlands. So that was March. In April, it fell from 36.1 down to 10.9. It just doesn't go that low. So This is one amongst a whole portfolio, suite of proxy measures we use to understand these knock-on effects. So a proportion of firms collapse, literally go bankrupt. A small number, interestingly, have grown, have expanded. There are firms out there making better profits than before. The majority, however, have shed labour and have stopped recruiting. So the next step of the cascading effect, we are seeing really large levels of unemployment. We know that this is going to hit by the end of October when furlough ends, and we're waiting to see what numbers will be revealed at that point. The government policy put in place after furlough is nowhere near as generous to firms. So we're expecting a knock-on effect from that. But there are significant increases already, and we're the youngest city in Europe. Almost 40% of the population is under 25, and it's absolutely critical to understand that this is really hitting our young population nationally, but also in this region. So the claimant count amongst the younger segment of our population is now up to just under 20%, 1 in 5. So this is going to worsen, and the next step in that cascading dynamic is that we're seeing already impacts on households. There's negative effects on health, well-being. This is pushing the inequality dial, on, and in a sense, we're going to see debt and vulnerable households going under. When vulnerable households go under, the burden comes back onto the government as benefits. And there's also a circularity. There are two kinds of circularity as we move back around to businesses. Consumer spending power goes down, and consumer spending patterns change, and that's something to watch. But households also provide workforce, managers, labour, so the health impact and the long-term unemployment for a proportion of these households does reduce their ability to be employed in productive work. And this is, again, a longer-term impact that we need to be careful to watch. So one estimate is that our region's economy is going to contract 9.1% for the whole of the year 2020 against the UK average of 7.1%. So in some senses, we're getting hit harder than most regions. The key issue to remember here is that the impacts are very varied by firm, by sector, and by location. So if you go on to the next slide, please. This variance is difficult to track. And when I talk about the epidemiology of economic impact, I'm talking about our challenge in City-REDI and other analysts trying to trace these knock-on effects and trying to understand where you should intervene. Where you should intervene precisely, not nationally fairly blunt instruments to help and subsidise and to support, but actually more precise interventions with limited resources to support and safeguard jobs where they're at risk, but also invest in places and firms and regions that can grow. So, what you see in front of you now is something we produced for the Mayor's Economic Impact Group. For 30 weeks now, City-REDI has produced up to 30 to 40 pages of data and analytics for the COVID-19 Economic Impact Group for the region that's chaired by Andy Street. It meets every Thursday, and every Thursday I present to that group some of the data that tries to understand this contagion effect, and some of the advice is about intervening wisely. And this is something that Beck Riley, who leads that effort from City-REDI, put to that group. And it's a really interesting illustration of the combined effects of Brexit and COVID. And it's a breakdown across our key sectors. Two of our largest sectors in GVA terms, GVA is gross value added. It's a measure of productivity, contribution to the region. Two of our largest sectors are the business, professional and financial services and the advanced manufacturing sectors. Together, they account for over 600,000 jobs directly. Indirectly, their importance is much, much larger. And you'll note that, for example, over half of the eligible employees for furlough in the advanced manufacturing are actually on furlough. So it's a bit smaller advanced manufacturing. In fact, it's less than half. It's just over half the size of business, professional, financial services in terms of the number of enterprises, but specifically GVA. But in terms of the exposure to Brexit, advanced manufacturing, is in terms of furlough and the percentage of GDP we think is at risk in a no-deal scenario, it is much bigger in terms of its risk exposure than any other sector. So there's complexity there, and this is just a set of fairly superficial proxy measures, but underlying that there are complex knock-on effects to firms, to businesses across our region and beyond, but also then to households. So next slide, please. And Deborah introduced today's session with a reference to resilience. I'm not going to get into this in too much detail, but effectively this is a test of resilience. This is, we define it as the capacity of a regional economy to withstand, recover, and to renew the growth trajectory in the face of market and competitive and environmental shocks. We were on a trajectory. It was a superb trajectory for this region, and now that's been interrupted. So there are three parts to this, and again, not too much detail, but there's your initial risk exposure, and ours is high. Ours is hugely high to both Brexit and COVID relative to other regions. The automotive manufacturing sector is a very big part of our economy. It has been revealed that it has weak liquidity, high debt. There are a range of problems beyond Brexit, and we're in difficult times that will have knock-on effects to other firms in the region. Our agility is being tested, your ability to respond and continually adapt. The one point I'll make there, and it's not a political point, this is an economics point. International studies and comparative analysis shows that if you lack public investment and if you have a lack of devolved decision-making power and resources you can draw on immediately within a region, you have a weak capacity relative to other regions in other parts of the world to design and deliver strategic, well-targeted interventions to, again, respond continually and adapt to these kinds of economic shocks. And the third thing there is, establishing a new growth path. Well, this is where I really want to end by shifting away from the doom and gloom, because it is a really tough time at the moment. But what about our capacity to recover quickly and renew? Now, the region bounced back incredibly quickly in a classic V-shaped response after 2008. And I think we could do really well. And I'll go to my last slide, please. So actually, interestingly, if we look at some of the data, the region is actually doing relatively well. And it doesn't feel like it, but the weekly monitor has consistently shown that firms, according to some indicators, are actually doing better than the average across the UK. And in particular, we have a higher percentage of enterprises that are reporting growth and a fewer number that are seeing the dramatic falls in revenues compared to the national average. Now, that's quite a nuanced point. We also have a pretty healthy new enterprise growth trajectory at the moment, which is healthy. The key point I want to sort of end with, though, is that, as we look up and we do look ahead, and we've got to be absolutely optimistic about this, looking up to next year, there are massive opportunities for renewed growth. We're going to hear from Mark Thurston shortly about HS2. We've also got grand events like the Commonwealth Games. And the key message, number one, out of these four messages is that we've got to leverage those big investments, not just for short-term growth, not just for temporary hits, and employment that goes away, but actually to invest in innovation, to invest in being the hub of future industrial growth over the long term. And we've got to make sure that we lock in some elements of those investments during that period. Secondly, we absolutely have to improve our collective ability to invest through regional partnerships. And in particular, I'd look at R&D. We do have fantastic universities here. The government is talking about using R&D to catalyse new growth in regions, and universities working with firms and with chambers of commerce can do fantastically well to target and bring investment that aligns with the fantastic existing clusters of skills and assets that we already have. And we've got to be precise, but we've got to lobby collectively for that. Skills, thirdly, are a massive part of this. Skills are hugely important to inclusivity, but they're hugely important also to new growth, to bringing talent to the region, higher income individuals, but also higher income firms that reinvest locally. Final point is pretty self-serving, and I'll be open about that, but in a sense, we have to be more precise. Evidence-based policy interventions, when you're looking at the epidemiology of economic shocks, there's got to be more resources put into excellent data analysis and evidence-based policy to support, private sector and the public sector in intervening, much more targeted way to both support the resilience and the future growth. And this is where I think City-REDI our excellent set of local partners, and I've listed on that final slide our wider partnership with the West Midlands Regional Economic Development Institute that we've set up. I want to thank those partners for the work they've done with us so far, and I thank them for the work we're going to do for the rest of this year and into next year. And again, to end, please do read the full economic review, because I've just given you a snapshot there, and there's a lot more insights from the documents online and in hard copy. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back over to Deborah and the panel and look forward to hearing their comments.
Thanks ever such a lot, Simon. Well, nobody can say it's not comprehensive. It certainly is, and it certainly shows the power of collaboration as well, and how important that is to the region. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panel now. We've got Mark Thurston, Chief Executive Officer of HS2. Mark has the privilege and ultimate responsibility for leading the company that's been charged with delivering the new high-speed railway. The company currently employs around 1,600 people, with the majority of the staff working at its headquarters in Birmingham. Mark joined HS2 in March 2017 and has some 30 years experience, including leadership roles in engineering, project and programme management. And he doesn't look old enough, so that's fabulous. And we've got Councillor Bridget Jones, Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council. Bridget was elected the local councillor for Selly Oak Ward in May 2011 and took on the Cabinet portfolio for Children and Family Services in 2012. As Cabinet Minister, she helped drive improvements in one of the country's most challenging and scrutinised children's services and departments, and overhauled the Education Department. And at the age of 30, she was elected as Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council. Bridget's agenda in her role is to harness the power of partnerships across Birmingham and to drive change in our city. Lynn Miles is Deputy Director, Industrial Strategy, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and has had over 20 years experience in economic growth policy, consulting at Arup. She's an economist by background, as well as a chartered town planner, and her work has covered economic growth policy advice, economic impact assessment and evaluation. So that's our panel. I'm going to hand over now to Mark, who will start the session. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, thanks, Deb, and thanks for your kind remarks. I certainly don't feel young enough. It must be the sort of frailties of Zoom make you look younger than you really are. But this job has taken its time in the last 3.5 years. But we'll talk about that in a bit more. Look, firstly, we're delighted to support this event as HS2. Me personally, we've got a good relationship with the university. A lot of work going on in their high-speed rail group, specific research in that area with Anson, Clive, and their team, and as David. And of course, I work with Paul and the Chamber quite a lot as well. So we're very keen to, participate in this review. I think it's the first time we've sort of been actively involved. And thanks for having us. I mean, we see ourselves very much now at HS2 as part of the heart of Birmingham, and not just because it's going to be the sort of central where the railway will be, but actually it's where our HQ is based. And I was up there only last week. We continue to have our Birmingham office in Snow Hill open, and probably best part of 1,000 people in normal times would be in that office. And this has been a big year for us at HS2 for a range of reasons, and I'll touch on one or two of the highlights. Notice to proceed, which was a big decision for the government, which effectively marked the sort of political and economic and financial commitment to the programme, was early this year. The Prime Minister sort of took personal interest in that decision, having announced the go-ahead of HS2 in the House in February of this year. And of course, some of you may have seen me on site with him only a month or so ago at Interchange Station, where we sort of formally marked the start of construction. So it's been a big year for us. And of course, in the background, our enabling works contractors have been preparing the way for the main construction to start. They've been on site for some years, and both those enabling works contractors and now our main work civils contractors have, they continue to expand. They continue to procure suppliers and services and resources from around the region. That will only grow as time goes on. And despite the challenges of the year, and Simon talked about a few of those to the sort of wider economic area, but of course we sort of feel it inside HS2 as well. Despite some of those challenges, we've made reasonably good progress over the course of the last 6 to 7 months in HS2. And we're probably, more aware than ever of the, huge sums of public money that are going in to build this railway. And for the next sort of year, 2 years, certainly as the country comes to terms with the impact of the pandemic and those sort of not just regional, but also wider national economic impacts, HS2 has got a role to play to create jobs, create prosperity, and create liquidity in a system that, as we heard from Simon, is struggling on a number of fronts. We've got some 12,000 people working right across what we call the HS2 family, the HS2 enterprise. Today, as Deb said in her introduction, there's about 1,700 of us in the company, but the rest of those jobs, 10,000 plus jobs, are now in our supply chain. We've now just passed, some of you may have seen, we've just passed the threshold of 400 apprentices, which is something really pleasing for me, someone who started their career as an apprentice. And at peak, we think we might need about 2,000 apprentices. That's a target we're working towards, and we'll probably need somewhere in the order of 30,000 people. And certainly the announcement we made with the Prime Minister a few weeks ago was about building up a workforce of nearly 20,000 just in the next sort of 12 to 24 months. Just sort of then looking sort of more widely at the impacts of the programme nationally, we think there's something in the order of 400,000 supply chain opportunities right across the UK for UK businesses. We expect 95% of those opportunities to be with companies who are based in around the UK. And our target, which we're generally meeting, is that 70% of those organisations are small and medium-sized enterprises. And of course, we all know that sort of SMEs are very much the lifeblood of our economy that serve the big tier 1 and tier 2 organisations. So we're already seeing good progress in that area, but that will continue to grow. And Birmingham, along with other cities around the UK, is already benefiting from that investment. And certainly pre the pandemic, you could sort of sense that Birmingham, as a young, vibrant city, in the way that Simon described, was starting to sort of see the benefit of the railway, years in advance of the railway being complete. But also 2020 has been a year for us on other sort of big construction milestones. We've worked very closely with the local authorities to get Curzon Street planning consent in Birmingham. Similarly with Solihull, we've got interchange planning consent. And these are important milestones for us because it allows us to really move to the next phase, really move our contractors forward. And then it all helps to create that level of investment. But the economic challenges of the pandemic have left their impact on us. We've seen certainly the early time of the pandemic, the need for us to sort of pause, make sure we were complying with various safety guidelines. As we've sort of come out the other side of an uncertain period this time last year and the early part of this year until we got the decision from the government, we're now seeing the impact of that in our supply chain. And frankly, we've got a huge sort of winter of ecology work for us to sort of maintain the overall programme for HS2, which is crucial for us. But as I've already said, we've got not just our contractors, we've got designers, we've got consultants, a whole series of support services. And the point I've made to other sort of chamber events before now, it isn't just jobs in sort of engineering and construction where HS2 can have a factor, but there's a whole sort of cascade effect and a sort of ripple effect of HS2 into the local and regional economy, and whether that's in transport, accommodation, welfare. We continue to house and need to house many people in around Birmingham, and somewhere in order of over 300 organisations are now working in the Birmingham area, working on HS2, all making a contribution to that economic situation that Simon described, which has seen some serious headwinds, but we're positive. And if you took BBV, Balfour Beatty Vancey, who are the principal main civils contractor for the area in around Birmingham, they expect to hire another 300 to 400 people only this side of Christmas alone. So we're seeing, despite some of these headwinds that Simon referred to, we're seeing some real green shoots come through. And we, as I say, very much see us playing our part in the local economy. So Deb, that's all I wanted to say. It's been a big year for us and we're not out of the woods yet. We're going into a tough autumn-winter period of work. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, I'm optimistic like Simon. I think there's a lot in the city's favour with us and then the Commonwealth Games to follow. And as we put Birmingham not just at the centre of HS2, but at the centre of the country's economy, I think there's a lot we can be positive about as we look forward into next year. Back to you, Deb.
Thanks ever such a lot, Mark, and thanks for your positivity. It's a good way to start the day. Bridget, could I come to you next and hear your thoughts? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I was speaking on the panel at last year's event, like Simon, and it was very different. It was a time of profound optimism for the city. We had High Speed 2, 5G, Commonwealth Games on the horizon, major projects progressing, and a lot of hope in the young population here. And all those things are still happening. They're all still here. But of course, everything else has changed around it. And here at the council, we've sort of had a view from the centre of the storm. So we, like most other businesses, moved our operations to being online pretty much overnight back in March, and we had to take on a load of significant new roles on top of what we normally deliver. We delivered food to several thousand shielding residents over the first few months who couldn't physically leave their front door. We gave out in business grants and rate relief almost as much as we'd taken in the year before. We mobilised en masse to help homeless people off the streets. And our public health team stepped up and started leading the medical COVID response across the city. And Simon's made a really key point about partnership working, which has never been more important than it's been now. I've joined the Mayor's Economic Impact Group, and at the council, we've been meeting with partners across the city through City Board with reps from every sector fortnightly at the beginning of lockdown to share information, share intelligence, and to be able to coordinate responses on top of all of our normal partnership working. We've been dealing with this disaster whilst trying to do the day job. Simon touched on the economic inequalities that have been thrown up by COVID, and just wanted to draw on those a bit because we've always known that those economic inequalities were there, but COVID has thrown them into really sharp relief in our city. If you're Black, if you're Asian, if you're from another ethnic minority, COVID is significantly more likely to have affected your business. You are significantly more likely to have been working in a frontline role in more danger, and COVID is more likely to have infected somebody from your family, and it's more likely to have taken from you somebody that you love. If you're a woman, you're more likely to have had your sector shut down over the last few months. And again, you are much more likely to have lost your job as we start to come out of this. If you're young, you were already experiencing a huge wage gap compared to the generation that came 10 years before you, with tuition fees and unaffordable housing exacerbating that. The youth claimant rate, as Simon has mentioned, has risen since the report was written. It's now 19% of our under 25s are unemployed, and that's before furlough comes to an end at the end of October, which is sustaining jobs in many of the sectors that our young people still work in. And that's coming on the back of a heavily disrupted education, which will have long-term consequences we're yet to see. And COVID has not come for people equally. It's not come for all bits of our economy equally. And probably the biggest dividing line in our society over the last 7 months has been whether you're out on the front line working, at home like me, working on your laptop, or at home not working at all because you're on furlough or because you've been made redundant. I'm very conscious of much of what was reported in the really excellent report the City-REDI's put together was written before the latest round of COVID restrictions came in last week. And of course, lockdown eased over the summer, but things have swung back since then. And the first set of new restrictions for Birmingham was announced on the 11th of September. And it's worth just a serious note about these because they've had such a profound impact on our economy that it's really important, I think, to understand how decisions are being made on this. And it links back to Simon's point about the centralised nature of decision-making in our country, and also his really key point about the need for evidence-based intervention in all of this. And I just want to stress that whilst I am a politician, I want to make it really clear this is not a party political point, as we've been working closely across the two main parties on this locally. On the 11th of September, we very nearly entered what is effectively the tier 2 restrictions that eventually came in last week, which would have restricted people from meeting people outside their own households in hospitality, effectively knocking out most of the hospitality trade. That almost came in despite the fact that only 2% of our COVID transmissions at the time in the city were coming from the hospitality sector. And this was not a set of restrictions that had been discussed with the council or the regional mayor. We caught it by chance mere minutes before the government put it live. And it was only through an intense set of last minute lobbying and negotiation from the council, CA and cross-party MPs that we managed to stop that from happening and to save those jobs in that sector for one more month. And I'm sharing that with you because these restrictions have such a real and visceral impact on our economy and on people in our city. We were moments away from having those jobs snuffed out with no warning about it and against local advice and local evidence. And Simon's point about the need for a more localised response to this that is evidence-based and has the confidence of local people that it's the right thing to do is so, so important in this going forward. We've now, of course, got tier 2 restrictions in. They came in just under a week ago. I've taken some soundings from the hospitality sector in our city to see how that last week has been. We've got some venues that are 75% down in their takings on the week before. We've got city centre pubs taking as little as £40 a night. We've got one busy city centre bar cutting 70 staffing hours in the last week. And it's not just the lack of people coming in that's the problem, it's the quick fire of new regulations that's coming out and the lack of notice that's also hitting businesses and confidence. Table service, for example, increases your staffing costs massively at a time when income is plummeting. Our staff are stressed from having to enforce rules that they feel that they can't. And it's largely small businesses with heartbroken and exhausted owners. And it's not just hospitality affected as well. I spent my weekend walking around one of our local high streets, Soho Road. Councillors know how to have fun at the weekend. A high street that's so diverse that UOB has actually done academic studies on it. It's one of our most diverse and vibrant local high streets in Britain. But it wasn't on Saturday. It was grim. Simon illustrated at a high level the sort of ecosystem that is our economy. I'll just illustrate Soho Road, sort of give you an example of the lived experience in our city on the ground of that at the moment. The Asian wedding industry, which normally dominates one stretch of that road, is dead. You can't hold big gatherings. The dry cleaners was down from 7-day working to 2-day working a week, because of course no one's going out to work, no one's wearing fancy clothes anymore that they might get dry cleaned. The nail bar had one customer all day because no one's going out, so there's no need to show off your nails. The insurance shop, the car insurance shop, was down 30% on their takings from last year because their customers couldn't afford to keep their cars anymore and were selling them and were cancelling their insurance because they didn't have a car anymore. Everyone we spoke to on that normally bustling, vibrant high street, if it wasn't a grocery store, they were in trouble. And we spoke to the bid team there, who have seen a surge in drinking, drug dealing and street prostitution as people in already precarious situations and employment start to fall off the edge as this recession starts to bite. And I'm sharing this with you not to be the merchant of doom and gloom, but to really illustrate the lived experience of the economy on the ground, of some of the big picture things Simon has really helpfully illustrated. Last week, we sent a letter to government calling for more support as we go into tier 2, because at the moment we're in the worst of both worlds. We've got restrictions, but no financial support from government. And that letter had as its signatories the council, 9 cross-party MPs from our city, 6 cross-party lords, 2 regional trade union secretaries, 1 Lord Bishop, 9 business organisations, a cast of people that you would not normally come together in a rallying call, but who did, to call for the financial help that our city needs to cushion these new restrictions, because we know what the cost is of not having it. And before this pandemic, we had a task ahead of us. We had 42% of our kids waking up in poverty every morning, but we had great hope and great opportunity to change that with things coming like the Commonwealth Games that I've mentioned, high speed 2, 5G. We've still got all those great things to look forward to, but we're in such danger in the short term of slipping further back from where we were this time last year if we don't get the support that we need right now. I'm not sharing this all with you to be a merchant of doom and gloom. I'm saying it because I love my city, and it's only by knowing it, it's only by seeing the lived reality and the consequences for people on the ground of some of these big picture things underneath the big numbers in a report like this that you really understand the urgency to act. It's not going to be money alone that gets us through this. We need business I mean, we need business survival support now, but we also need clear and locally tailored evidence-led interventions going forward, and hope, crucially, hope and optimism and a clear way out of this from the government if we're going to get our city back to not just where it was last year, but into an altogether better place going forward. Thanks.
Thanks so much a lot, Bridget. The passion for your passion for the city is evident, and I think you did a fantastic job with what you've said, because you covered just about everybody within the city and how it's impacting on everybody. It's not just hospitality; it's everybody. There's touch points everywhere. So thank you for that. And we'll go into further discussion shortly. But can I hand over to Lynn now? Lynn, would you like to give your presentation? Thank you.
Good morning. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. As introduced, I'm Lynn Miles. I'm relatively new to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Slight correction to my initial billing. I'm the Deputy Director for Industrial Strategy rather than for Economic Recovery, although obviously working closely with colleagues in Economic Recovery. It's really helpful for us generally, and for me in particular, to be involved with events like these. Really vital intelligence gathering, and it's important that we keep really close to those pictures of local economies to understand how we drive our planning for recovery, and in thinking about where we go next for the industrial strategy. I'm particularly sad not to be there in person, not only because of the lack of lovely breakfast, but also because I've got really great affection for Birmingham. I went to university in Warwick. It was the only place for a decent night out, so I've got very fond memories of getting the bus in and clubbing together for a taxi home to have a bit of a dance in the city centre. And so the importance of that hospitality and leisure economy for the wider city region, I understand is a really big issue. I suppose just a few remarks in terms of COVID and economic recovery. I think to an extent, sort of the government's thinking about this has been framed in phases, in waves, right? So sort of the immediate response and support packages that I know, just as Bridget said, lots of people in my department sort of waking up overnight to the need to put together programmes, packages, loan schemes and so forth that just weren't needed yesterday, and to do that at sort of rapid pace, and then to continue to tweak and iterate them as that played out and in response to the feedback from sort of early parts of those schemes. So sort of moving on to thinking a little bit more about what are the sort of oven-ready boosters to the economy that we've got that we can push out to try and create a channel of demand in particular over the next sort of 12 months or so. So then thinking through things like getting building fund, Greens Homes grant, particular focus on green growth, particularly in the sort of kickstart phase of this. Thinking about 4,000 brand new zero carbon buses, how we can invest in housing to stimulate demand in the construction sector, to support jobs there. The Reopening High Streets Safely Fund, which is supporting a mixture of measures, including sort of making retail and other outlets COVID secure, and essentially helping businesses to respond, retool, and think about how we can stimulate demand in the short to medium term. And then beyond that, in the longer term, kind of looking forward to how we support the economy sort of beyond the COVID phase. And at the moment, doing our best to join the dots in terms of thinking about the short-term response and how you frame that in a way that moves you towards the economy you want to have in the long term. So that's why it's been particularly focused on trying to achieve growth through green measures and so forth. And it's the job of the industrial strategy and my team's job to sort of take us beyond recovery and think about that longer term horizon. So both to think about how we support and improve the jobs and businesses that we all work in, but also how to invest in supporting the jobs that our kids will be working in a decade or 2 decades from now. And it's fair to say the economic landscape has shifted quite dramatically since the 2017 industrial strategy, and the coming decade will continue to pose new and different challenges. So as we recover from the COVID pandemic and the uncertainty about how and when that will be, and as we adjust to a new relationship with the EU, we need to think about how we can make sure we're making a green recovery. So we do grow a sort of more resilient economy into the longer term, and that we really maximise the benefits of the investment that government will make in meeting our net zero commitments, because there's a huge amount there. So at the moment, we're thinking about how to make sure that industrial strategy remains relevant and it responds to current issues and reflects this government's priorities. So we're looking at the 2017 strategy in terms of what's working well, what needs to evolve, particularly in response to those COVID challenges. But very conscious that actually there were a lot of challenges nationally, productivity-wise, going into this. So some real star performers in terms of areas, in terms of sectors, but also a sort of underlying productivity challenge that will still be there when we get to the other end of this crisis. And in many cases, maybe worse because of the problems caused by this crisis and the knock-on impacts on demand and investment and the disruption to supply chains. And the productivity challenge isn't just a problem of sort of a handful of sort of a large body of long-tail firms. It's a productivity challenge across all sectors and across all places. So even those that do relatively well underperform in terms of productivity. So really making sure we don't lose sight of the need to sort of correct those long-term structural problems as well as deal with the immediate crisis, which is obviously a challenge. And finally, to say there are sort of quite a lot of known unknowns about how the world changes beyond this pandemic. So it's probably changed our perspective on the relative balance of economic resilience as part of the growth mix. There's a lot of thinking going around about how much of the elements of the economic change in response to the pandemic will stick. So various innovations that are going on in business and the way they deliver their services, how much of that will stick as we move out of the pandemic phase, how much working from home will carry on. And a lot of that genuinely remains unknown. I have my personal guesstimate, but no one knows for sure. And so we're trying to think through all of those issues as we develop our strategy. And on the Birmingham economy today, I mean, obviously Birmingham plays a key role in the West Midlands Combined Authority, which itself is an important driver of the UK economy. And I think, you know, in my view, these core cities and the city regions that surround them are important for two critical reasons. Firstly, because we have to balance the UK economy, and this government's made levelling up a sort of central plank of its manifesto agenda. And part of doing that is in strengthening the second cities of the UK to perform at the level they should have been doing, and to support them in the investment that will allow them to do that. And also because those key cities support the growth of the smaller towns and cities that sit in their orbit. So in strengthening those cities, you sort of both rebalance the economy and support the wider areas they sit in. West Midlands obviously holds a special place in the heart of the IS team. You've produced the first local industrial strategy here, which has got obviously a really strong focus on the opportunities in automotive and mobility and in life sciences. I know these sectors are facing major challenges, both from COVID and associated with the transition from leaving the European Union. But I also know that the region does have a lot of really strong assets that's quite well placed to build on. And I would sort of come back to the points made at the beginning about part of risk and impact is about the exposure, but part of it is in the way in which there is resilience to respond to that, and in the innovation which you bring to doing that and how you build on assets. So Birmingham will continue to be a key focus for growth for this government in terms of levelling up, and Mark is here because HS2 is already stimulating private investment in this region. But as much as anything, I'm in sort of listening mode here today. This is a really interesting report. I am looking forward to getting into the detail that sits behind a lot of the headlines. I know you're all aware that the government is reviewing its future spending plans over the next few weeks, and it's not for me to preempt any of the decisions they make. I know the Mayor has been promoting a really ambitious package of proposals for this region, and rightly so. I'm not sure the Treasury could ever fully satisfy every Mayor's ambitions for its region, but we do understand and recognise the priorities, particularly around creating new markets and opportunities in electric and connected autonomous vehicles and in the components for those, accelerating commercialisation of medicines and technologies, targeting SMEs, boosting dynamism and productivity across all of sectors. So really important to maintain that focus across the economy as well as in those key sectors. Treasury's got a really difficult job in the next month, but whatever the outcome, I think we're looking forward to working with you to try and take in more of the evidence that you're giving us and to help in your development of your local strategies. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to taking part in the discussion.
Thanks so much, Lynn. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into the question session with the panel now. I've got a couple of questions that I've got to ask you, and then I'm going to go through the audience Q&A. I have to say we could probably spend most of the morning on this because the questions have come in thick and fast. So for me to start really is from what you've heard as a group, from what you've heard so far, is there anything that you found surprising from within the report, or from what you've heard from each other? Is there something that stands out at all from what you've heard that you weren't anticipating?
I think, Deb, I was struck with some of the sort of stats that Bridget, shared with us around sort of impact to the local economy. And I think when you sort of get into that detail and you sort of hear firsthand what it's doing to businesses in around the city, which, as both Simon and Bridget said, this time last year there was sort of an upward trajectory and a good feeling around the city with a sort of bright future, and it sort of feels like we've totally had the wind taken out of that sail. So I think just a sobering point, really. And as I say, into my opening remarks, as sort of an increasing employer in the city and seeing Birmingham very much at the heart of the network and being part of that momentum of sort of seeing the sort of reality of some of those issues is, sobering for us all, really. That would be my one observation.
And go on, sorry, Lynn. Carry on.
That's right. I was just going to add to that and say, I think, so look, as an economist sitting in civil service, it's very easy to just look at data and to watch numbers come through and to get quite divorced from the reality of what that is on the ground. And it's really important that you are talking to people and hearing stories like that. But the particular part that I wanted to pick up was the sort of the uneven impacts of this pandemic and how that affects people differently. And one of the things my team is working quite hard on is making sure that we do understand sort of the equalities impacts of what's happened over the last 6 months, 9 months, and what will continue to happen, and how we build that into how we respond to and come out of this pandemic. So thank you for those stories.
Absolutely. So I've got a question for Bridget. I mean, we've seen throughout the course of the pandemic, from a city centre economy point of view, we've had a 48% reduction in city centre footfall in August compared to pre-lockdown levels. Hospitality and tourism, 79% of eligible West Midlands accommodation and food services roles were furloughed. And the arts and culture event, 69% of West Midlands arts and entertainment and recreation and other service roles have been also furloughed. So how is Birmingham City Council going to work to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on local businesses and protect sectors such as major events?
Thank you. So 3 things really. So first of all, we've been giving practical support. So we administrated the government grants programme, which was £230 million going out to 19,000 businesses across the city, plus a discretionary element of that we targeted locally to sectors that we felt really needed it. We've taken a flexible approach to rents and business rates, and we've looked at other local measures too, such as closing off streets to create more outdoor seating for businesses that need the space, helping spruce up high streets and getting them COVID ready with street markings and extra build outs for extra pedestrian space, things like that. So we've been trying to do what we can on a very practical, on the ground level. Second is we've been listening to our partners and lobbying with the bids, with the Chamber of Commerce throughout. We backed national campaigns. Chamber of Commerce was leading on the We Make Events campaign, which was highlighting the impact on the events sector in the city. And as I said earlier in introductory remarks, we've been making the case really clearly to government about what is happening in our city and what we think we need to mitigate that. We'll keep on doing that, making the case for clear evidence-based interventions and not last-minute announcements that kill off confidence, and backing it up with cash support as well. And thirdly, we're looking to the future. We know that we're probably going to bounce through probably a couple more waves of this, going in and out of some form of lockdown or increased restriction before COVID dissipates. And we've been working we've gone out to consultation now on an economic recovery strategy for the city, and the sort of key themes around that are green recovery, looking to the green manufacturing sector and so on, in order to generate jobs, making sure that our growth is truly inclusive, because as I said earlier, we know that our city simply isn't as inclusive as it could be at the moment. But also one of the things I shouldn't really mention is we've been working on Brexit as well, which is something we've barely touched on so far this morning. And that's a huge thing that's coming across the horizon for us at the end of the year. And on that, incredibly worried about what that's going to bring for our businesses that are already battered by COVID, and just have this whole cloud of uncertainty over them, with even less capacity to put into preparing for Brexit than they had a year ago when we last faced a no-deal cliff edge. Money that would have been used previously to stockpile goods coming over the border is gone. Staff capacity that would have been used to get ready for new regulations and so on is busy dealing with COVID. But we've been working with the Chamber. We've funded through a pooled budget with the CA business preparedness work to help businesses prepare and to get ready for what might come as best that they can. And that's going to be a key thing for us as well going forward, making sure that we cushion the shock of that, although our resources to do that locally, I have to say, are incredibly limited.
Thanks, Bridget. And Lynn, the sectors in automotive and tourism are particularly impacted by the advent of coronavirus. What do you expect economic recovery to look like for these sectors and their supply chains? And will they regain their pre-2020 economic significance? Not a big question at all.
I am in no way in possession of a crystal ball. I will say that this is a really hard time for those sectors, and I really don't want to downplay that at all. And it's not only horrible for the sectors as sort of impersonal sectors, but it's really pretty horrible for the people that own businesses and try and keep them afloat, and who are worried for their jobs or losing their jobs. And so nothing that I'm about to say downplays that, but I sort of do remain optimistic in the long run, that the underlying strengths that support a thriving tourism and hospitality sector in Birmingham are still there and will rebound. And I hope that the Commonwealth Games next year will support that, and in the long term that will rebound. And that's a really easy thing for an economist to say, right? In the long term, we're all dead, and it doesn't help the individuals having a very bad time at the moment. But I am optimistic about that. I hope that the 15% VAT cut for those sectors will help to mitigate that impact. In automotive, I mean, this is a time of transition, and it's going to be a difficult few months, and we don't quite know what the outlook is for that sector in terms of the deal or not that we reach in terms of the end of the EU exit transition period. But there are sort of massive underlying assets in this sector. There are huge R&D strengths, and there's a lot to be played for globally. I mean, our analysis does show that this continues to be a global growth industry, and that there are scenarios in which there's a strong UK, right to win in those sectors. And for us, the focus is going to be on how we support sectors to transition to take advantage of those opportunities, particularly in electric vehicles, in energy storage, and connected and autonomous vehicles. I mean, the car supply chain is estimated at about 650 billion globally. There are big manufacturers here that make critical investments in R&D. One of the things the government has done in the last 6 months is set out its R&D roadmap, and how we can get the UK back to the point where it's get to the point where it's investing 22 billion a year in R&D, and working out exactly how that plays out now. But those sorts of investments are what we hope will support moving the sector to a longer term footing that is sustainable and prosperous.
Thanks, Lynn. And if we move, we're talking about innovation and adaptation and resilience through change. The actual review itself showed that there was a growing tech sector within the region, 17,581 jobs in digital tech, and with a home of 5G, of course, with a 75 million investment, which has been allocated to WM 5G test beds. A question from Mark around innovation and business. How is HS2 engaging with innovative startups to address challenges around construction?
Yeah, thanks, David. Good question. And we see, and I wear two hats here actually, because not just the chief exec, but the other hat I wear for the sort of the infrastructure sector, is we have an innovation platform that brings all organisations together, client, supply chain. It's called I3P. I co-chair it with someone from the Environment Agency, and the purpose of I3P is to create effectively a partnership between clients, but particularly SMEs and small businesses, because that's where, you know, they're the lifeblood of innovation in our sector. And we've done a lot of work with I3P to sort of create a pull through from the sort of tier ones and the tier twos into the client businesses. We've also, but specifically close to the home on HS2, we're running what we call an HS2 Innovation Accelerator. So the reality is, if we're going to build this railway on time and on budget, which is the expectation I have it's set on me by government, we're going to need to innovate. And frankly, the scale of what we're doing on HS2 really, for me, gives us an obligation to innovate. So the first 5 successful companies have joined our Innovation Accelerator program. Through that, they get 6 months commercial support, some technical support. We create some working space for them. And this is about us using our convening power as HS2 to bring those companies sort of through, working more directly with us, connecting them with the tier ones who've sort of got the ultimate sort of need on our behalf to find smarter ways of doing things. And, you know, there's a long way to go. I mean, we're seeing some green shoots around, for example, carbon, you know, reduction in carbon in materials, autonomous vehicles, much greater use of sort of battery, moving away from diesel, sort of wearable technology that's improving site safety. So this is starting to bear fruit on a number of fronts, but it's a long game for us, and we expect to be sort of very much at the heart of some of the work innovation. We're also very much part of the work that the university sector is doing. So we're working with UCRIC and UCRIM, which are the two networks of universities in both construction and railways, looking at how we sort of bring academia and research into play. So I think you know, it's a big opportunity for us. It's a big playground, and I think the trick will be to sort of focus in on those areas where we know we can make a real difference. And you know, certainly carbon, I think, is one for us where you know, with the scale of what we're doing, we very much see a prize for the industry as a legacy of the work we do on innovation.
Thanks for that, Mark. Actually, you've answered 2 questions I was going to ask you there, because I was going to ask you about the whole carbon, you know, what you were doing around supporting the transition to net zero carbon. So, you know, touching on that, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say there, I mean, in the longer term, if you think about rail travel, I think there was a question in the box around, you know, what's the sort of analysis and the economics around HS2 sort of now with COVID, with greater sort of use of online working and remote working. And frankly, you know, the Department for Transport at some point, I think, has got to rerun the business case and understand what sort of how current economic factors play out to the long-term sort of economics of HS2. But the strategic case for HS2 is very clear. And if we're going to have a sort of carbon zero economy, the greenest way to travel around our country will be by train. It's 7 times greener than traveling by car and 17 times greener than traveling by domestic air. So if you want to get between the major cities of this country in the future, which is what we expect people to do post the pandemic, then recognise it's going to take us 10 years to build the railway from Birmingham to London, and it's another 10 years to go north to Leeds and Manchester. So, you know, this is a railway for 100, 120 years plus, and having that high-speed rail connection and putting capacity into our rail system, which also allows, of course, us to get lorries off the roads. Every lorry, you know, I think one freight train is worth something like 76 lorries. So, you know, you see it as part of a much wider contribution to a low carbon economy.
Thanks, Mark. You've answered about 3 questions that we could ask you. So you're a gift that keeps on giving. So
I'll put the kettle on, dear. I'll go and put the kettle on.
Thank you for that. Okay, and probably the last question from me is to Lynn. and it's around, population and youth and diversity. We've got a very young population in Birmingham. 37.5% are aged under 25, and we've got a very diverse population. And the industrial strategy and recent government policies have placed a significant focus on the investment in skills pertaining to high paid and high skilled jobs of the future. How has the coronavirus changed what those jobs of the future might be, do you think?
I don't think the coronavirus is going to fundamentally change the jobs of the future. Perhaps I'm wrong about that. I think probably what it's doing is accelerating the pace of change, not only in the types of jobs that we do, but in the way in which we do them. So there's a lot of thinking going on at the moment about the extent to which this has perhaps changed whether and how people work from home, and which of those sort of business process innovations that have happened, particularly around pivoting to online services or novel services, are going to stick. So I think, in my view, we will revert somewhere closer to where we have been. I don't think this is a fundamental change that means the end of cities, everyone's suddenly working from home and can work from anywhere, but other people may disagree with me. But in terms of people and skills, I mean, we've talked about tech and the importance of digital, not just as a sector, but as a sort of set of skills that support working in all sectors. And skills remain at the heart of how we are resilient and how we respond to whatever those changes are, whether or not I'm right in terms of how those jobs play out. So I think we're keen to see a particular focus on adult skills, by which I mean the skills of people already in the workforce, including young people. So how we're able to reskill and redeploy people so that they can respond to shocks and changes. There's a further education white paper on its way, which will think about how we make some fundamental changes to that sector, which has been relatively uninvested in for a considerable amount of time, making it more employer-led, making it better at doing shorter, sharper retraining that supports people to be resilient to shocks, and perhaps end a little bit of the relative imbalance with the university education that has been happening. But across the piece, I think we see a focus on sort of digital skills, on skills associated with the green economy, but also skills associated with the jobs we need to keep our society going. So health and social care and those sorts of jobs, also an important focus of where we make our skills investment.
Thanks, Lynn, for that. I'm going to move on to some of the audience questions now. And this is one particularly for Simon. Lockdown revealed underlying fragility in our economic recovery and business health, and Simon touched on this in his slides. Could he expand on precisely what are the key areas of business that we need to build resilience in to make the recovery from COVID and Brexit sustainable for the 2020s? For example, if he was running a Birmingham business, which key areas would he focus on for resilience?
Thanks very much. I think I know who asked that question as well. The latter part, if I was good enough to run a business, I wouldn't be in academia, I suspect. This is a very tough time. I mean, my first response to that is actually the key issue is that the interventions need to balance safeguarding with investments in potential growth areas. And what that means is, and it's a very difficult balance, you can't allow too many firms to go under and too many new unemployed to hit the benefits burden. And it's not just because that's a short-term hit on finances, actually long-term, a large number of unemployed become less employable and less productive. So the safeguarding is critical. The safeguarding means just reduce unemployment. You will tend to be focusing on different types of businesses for the safeguarding investments and interventions than recovery and growth interventions. But the balance means that you've also got to try and understand how some firms are not just going to make it through this. Some firms are thriving and adapting and innovating very quickly, and we need to enable those during this period to make the investments so that they can thrive and grow. I tend to agree with Lynn. A lot of the fundamentals are not going to change. It's just that the pace of change and the pressure to adapt is so strong resilience becomes critical. And those firms who might be good in another period of economic era, you know, are going to go down because they cannot adapt quick enough. So that dual support system means that, you know, the answer to the latter question is it would depend entirely what business I was running, because businesses are getting hit so differently. If I was in a business that, you know, was providing a high street service in hospitality or in tourism, you really have to reshape what you're doing for the short and medium term and hope that in the long term there's going to be a recovery to the old days. If you're in a digital online service delivery firm or creative industries, or you're in a firm like in some financial services where all of your employees are working productively from home, you know, the opportunity set and the decision making is completely different. Just one point though on top of that, though, that touches on the wider picture, I think Mark's talked to this really helpfully, is that there are certain enablers here. Digital will not rescue jobs. Digital is an enabler. The digital sector employs directly quite a small number of people. It enables, through 5G and other innovations in digital, enables productivity in small supply chain firms for automotive. It enables new products and services to come out of our M40 corridor of automotive, you know, excellent automotive R&D firms. So the enabling effects of creative digital or R&D investments needs to be leveraged for the good of a wider set of businesses. And I understand that sidestepping the key question of what I'd do if I was running a business, but that's deliberate.
Thanks, Simon. We've had a couple of people ask as well around the how they get to work with HS2, which is invariably happens when we have Mark on a panel. So I think we've been told that they are to contact the Chamber and Emily at the Chamber.
Yeah, in the first instance, there is a supply chain email address on our website as well, Deb. So and we'll keep a lookout. One of the things we do is we run a sort of meet the bidder events, and we also run meet the contractor events. So again, we use our convening power as HS2. We've had some really successful events at the NEC where we bring effectively the tier 1s and 2s in who we would employ, but we open that up to a whole raft of organisations who can provide all sorts of goods and services and support to the people that are either working for us or are likely to bid for work for us. So again, keep an eye out for those, and you know, we're very much keen to sort of, you know, do our part in creating opportunities for businesses, you know, in the city and the city region.
Thanks, Mark. And one of the other questions we've had is around diversity. We are an extremely diverse region, as we all know, and one of the questions has been, why is that not being reflected in the diversity of leadership? And whether anybody could comment on that.
I'll happily have a first go at that. I mean, this is quite a big deal for us at HS2. I do a note to my staff every month, and we made reference to the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this year and got probably more reaction from staff than any other interaction I'd had with them, and have since run a number of events. We've got quite a diverse workforce relative to our sector. Nearly 20% of our core workforce is from sort of Black and Asian ethnic minority groups, and we do pretty okay in gender balance. We're nowhere near as good as we should be at the top end of the business. So to your question, Deb, or the question from one of the delegates was about it's not in senior levels, and we've got more work to do there. But we've done a lot of good work with blind auditioning to make sure we're bringing diverse people into the business, and we've got a big recruitment campaign running just now. I read, and I've in fact, I board our whole leadership team are, because I asked them to, reading, and if you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend the Renido Lodge book, Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. If you want to understand this subject better, I think it's an excellent read. And I think certainly for me, as a white middle-aged man running this organisation that's based in the Midlands, which in itself is a very diverse community, I thought I needed to educate myself first to understand more about this subject and what more I can do, and how my shadow casts over our organisation and our supply chain in a way that we can create much greater opportunities for people from Black and Asian, in particular Black and Asian minority groups. And so there are some green shoots. We're having open conversations about HS2. We've definitely got more work to do at the leadership level. Our gender balance is pretty good, but we've got certainly more to do with BME colleagues. But what we have done is given them a voice very much, and I've taken on the personal sort of executive sponsorship of our BME network. And I'd like to be able to answer that question in 12 or 24 months from now with a slightly different answer.
Can I have a go at that one?
Yeah.
So when it comes to gender balance, we've seen women take the brunt of job losses from COVID. We've seen women pick up the brunt of childcare during COVID. We've seen women kicked out of the workplace because schools are shut down and because nursery care has shut down because of COVID. Discrimination against pregnant women and women who've recently had babies is so bad in this country that it had to be written into the Equalities Act as a whole separate category to sex and gender. And the equalities that have been hard fought for over a number of years are in danger of being seriously knocked back and not being recognised during this pandemic. We look at our workforce as a whole, women of menopausal age are one of the fastest growing segments of the workforce, and most employers don't have written into their strategies, their HR policies, policies for helping adapting to the needs of women that are going through the menopause in the workplace, and helping them stay economically active and stay at work. When it comes to Black, Asian and other ethnic minorities, at the council we published last month our Everybody's Battle, Everybody's Business document, which sets out our commitments to changing things at council level through things like Rooney Rule for senior appointments, things like not having all male or all white interview panels going forward. Fundamentally, if we're going to dismantle the systematic racism and inequality that has led us to be in a position where we are so divided as a city, and those awful inequalities that have been thrown into that stark relief by COVID, we're going to have to, as a city, recognise the problem across the piece. I'm still not convinced that that is a problem that is genuinely recognised and that we still have the data on that we need. And we need across sectors in the city, right from education all the way through to employment, we need a joint commitment from all of our partners to tackling it and to breaking down those things and to listening. I'm achingly aware I'm white, I'm not qualified to talk about the lived experiences of people that have suffered that systematic racism, but I'm able to listen, I'm able to do something from that listening, and we've got to get partners around the city realising it and signed up to making that change.
Thanks, Bridget. And this is a question for Simon, I think. COVID-19 has had an impact on the higher education sector. Going forward, how will this affect your capacity to continue to contribute to the resilience of the city and region as an anchor institution?
It's a good question, and it's choppy times for universities as well. But that's not. I mean, if anything, what the universities have shown is that those universities in regions where they have excellent existing partnerships with stakeholders have been able to use those platforms as civic universities to respond and support other stakeholders in responding to the crisis. And that's happened in a number of senses. So I'm quite positive actually about the ways that universities have stepped up to the mark. First of all, in terms of research, I mean, universities are doing fantastic research, not just on vaccines, but research on protective gear and research on, how we can track the epidemiology of infections. City-REDI does research on the economic impacts, and we have shifted our agenda at City-REDI totally to actually address the concerns and the questions of the private sector and the mayor, the combined authority, the chamber, in what does this mean? How do we predict the future? What interventions are the best things to do? But at a more fundamental level in the neighbourhoods around Edgbaston, but also in other city-based universities around the country, students have responded incredibly. The number of students who are volunteering to support food deliveries, helping the vulnerable, getting out into the neighbourhoods, students and staff have automatically, because they're part of those communities, responded in a really strong way. Now, that's been an immediate response, and I think it's been hugely effective because of the existing relationships. You couldn't do this from the get-go. If you've set up collaborative partnerships already, you're in a much better position to help. I think in the future, though, there are big questions about funding of universities, the student numbers that are going to come over. And let's face it, we have grown our reliance on foreign students. And in a sense, you know, if that revenue stream starts to die out, then we will face huge difficulties. And that'll undermine our ability to both educate and do great research. So, you know, it's not a simple future for universities either. We've done a lot of analysis, and it is the case that the West Midlands City region is actually hugely reliant on, you know, not just the things I've talked about, but actually the economic impact of students, staff, faculty living and working in the region. We are one of the most exposed to a decline in the university sector. But, you know, we're confident and optimistic that we can adapt like other organisations and make it through this.
Thanks for that, Simon. And I think this is the last question I can take now. I'm afraid we could be here all morning because they are coming in thick and fast. Bridget mentioned the green economy and also the face-to-face impact on individuals. Do we face a challenge of more pain for businesses, perhaps an example of taxes in the clean air zone, against the benefits of shifting to lower carbon, environmentally less damaging investments, perhaps when businesses have less cash? So really it's the impact of the clean air zone on business.
I wondered when that would come up. So the clean air zone, first of all, it's important to remember the impact that unclean air is having on our city. So we estimate around 900 people lose their lives every year prematurely in our city because of the state of our air. And that is almost the same number that COVID has killed in our city this year. It is a staggering amount of people that we are losing because of this. So the case for change is really, really clear. We know, though, that it's not easy for people to pivot into cleaner vehicles. Our 75% of private vehicles won't be affected and will not pay a penny to drive into the city centre because they're already clean enough. We know that for those that are driving the other 25%, we know that for businesses that have heavy goods vehicles and so on, that it is difficult. You go to our Brum Breathes website, just Google Brum Breathes and you'll find it. We've set out a number of exemptions and a number of interventions we're making for businesses to pivot. A lot of work with particularly black cabs to help them adapt, to help them get hold of grants, to help them get hold of cleaner vehicles. If you are a small SME, you may well qualify for grants to help you retrofit your vehicles or to buy new fleet. If you work in the city centre and you're on a low income, you may qualify for grants to either scrap your vehicle or actually have about 3 years worth of free bus travel on us instead of using your vehicle. There's a whole set of we've been listening to businesses when building these exemptions and these this package of measures up. It's all been, everything we put together is based on what businesses have told us that they need, and it's being funded through government grants. If you go onto the Brum Breathes website, check out the reality of it, because there is a lot of misinformation out there about the clean air zone, and see what is really happening for your business and what you might qualify for. And around the city, of course, we're pushing in, ultimately there's an issue of tarmac economics there. We physically don't have enough space on our roads for the number of people that want to drive cars and vehicles in our city. So even if we do get you all pivoting to cleaner vehicles, sooner or later we literally physically run out of space and the city gets gridlocked. So running alongside all the vehicle changes that we're making, we've been investing in hydrogen buses, got a new fleet of those going live in the city. We're trying to get local train lines reopened and more frequent services on those. We've been putting in pop-up bus lanes and cycle lanes around the city to keep the city moving through COVID and cope with the increase in active travel. We know they haven't always been popular. We will be reviewing those and adapting them to make sure they're fit for the future going forward, but we wanted to get them in quickly. Ultimately, the clean air zone is just one part of a much bigger strategy to make the city more sustainable and keep it moving and keep business flowing through the city.
Thanks a lot, Bridget. Well, does anybody else want to make a comment on anything before I close? Or you're good? Fabulous. Well, I'd like to say thank you to the panel, all of you. Thank you for giving of your time, and thank you for your passion for the region. you know, you could touch that passion. It was amazing. So thank you for that. And I'd like to say thank you also to Sir David Eastwood for the warm welcome that he gave us at the beginning of the session. So thank you guys, and thank you to you who have been listening in and for all your questions. I'm sure you've got lots more, and I'm sure we'll do another one of these sessions very soon. Thank you.